All right, well, I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight in the room in this public lecture organized by the Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics, KAIL. Just a few words about the center. KAIL was launched in January 2012 with great ambitions and efforts aspiring to lead reform and renewal in contemporary Islamic studies, particularly in the legal thought, ethical thought, the legal and ethical thought and practice. KAIL is working on producing, disseminating, and applying a sustainable ethical framework that both addresses global challenges and also engages the scholars of the text and the scholars of the context in 12 different fields, including media, politics, bioethics, art, environment, education, migration and human rights, methodology, as well as few other fields. So tonight, I'm very honored to introduce Professor Tariq Ramadan. He is KAIL director. He is a visiting scholar in Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar, and he is also a professor at Oxford University in the UK. Dr. Tariq is a globally renowned authority in the field of contemporary Islamic studies, and tonight, he will be sharing his thoughts, reflections, and insights about the need of a revolution in the field of Islamic studies, a revolution that he characterizes as intellectual and spiritual. So, like you, I'm very much keen to listen to Dr. Tariq Ramadan's wisdom. I won't speak much. The floor is his in 45 minutes.
أعوذ من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Thank you, Fatima Zahra, for this introduction. Thank you for being here. And I know that some came mainly because of the title, thinking that there is something here that could be interesting. And yes, I think that I have been working on Islamic studies for the last I don't know, almost 30 years, 25 years, and coming back to this, I really think that we need to reassess where we are and what we want to achieve. As an introduction, I want to precise and to try to tackle four main points that I want to start with. The first is the way I'm dealing and the way I'm discussing the concept of revolution. What I mean by revolution, it's the literal meaning of revolution, a complete change of perspective in the way we are dealing with Islamic studies today. When I say a complete change in our perspective, I mean four different dimensions. The first one is the sources of the Islamic studies, the substance of the Islamic studies, the means and the goals. So it's everything. So the sources, what are we talking about when we speak about al-masadir, the sources? The substance is al-muhtawa, it's really what we are teaching and the way we are teaching it. The means, with all due respect, I also mean by these the teachers, the who are involved in the process of transmitting the knowledge, and the goals, what we want to achieve. So this is the first thing. What I mean is this revolution, changing the evolution, changing the way things are dealing with. In 45 minutes, it's difficult to be at the same time exhaustive in the substance and come to with practical answers to this. So I will be in between, challenging the whole conceptual reference and then coming also with some practical, very specific things that we have to deal with when it comes to Islamic studies. the practical responses, and especially when we have a faculty of Islamic studies, it's also a way for us to be constructively critical with what we are doing in our institution. Having said that, now the second point which it's important is we speak about Darasat Islamiyya, Islamic studies, as well as we speak about Ulum Islamiyya, Islamic sciences. So the question is as follows, is what is Islamic in Islamic studies? What is Islamic? Why are you referring to Islam when it comes to this? And it's exactly the same with Islamic sciences. Is it because the object of what we are studying is Islamic, meaning the text, the scriptural sources of Quran and Sunnah, and then all the sciences that are related to those two main sources? Are we talking here about the methodology? Is there something which is very specific in Islamic studies that we are dealing with al-manhajiyya, the methodology, in the way we are dealing with it? That's also something which it's important. And then are we dealing here with a set of principles that are directing our sciences? Meaning by this that we have a problem ourselves trying to define what are sciences and what is science. Not only us, by the way, as Muslims, if we deal with it, but it's now a contemporary challenge to define science in the postmodern era, and very often what we have is Muslims in between the two universes of frames of reference and not knowing exactly how to define things. So sometimes we come as a very traditional thing, and sometimes we are complexifying so much the concept that we don't know what we are talking about. Having said that, and what I'm coming to this discussion, and this is the third point of my introduction, is that we have to reassess our goals. What do we want to achieve? And once again, the way we are dealing with science, when we say, okay, what is science, is a specific methodology having a specific object of study. This is what we call biology is this, this is this object, and the object is imposing onto the scientists the methodology. It's the object that is imposing. It's exactly the same with the Quran. The Quran is a text, and we have to deal with grammar, with semantic, with morphology, with anything which has to do with a text, and the text is imposing onto us the methodology. Now, the point here is, when it comes to this, is this something that we are doing in a void? Meaning by this, that a science is only an object with a methodology without an ideology behind it? Are we talking, when we talk about science, about something which is disconnected from any subjectivity because it's science, or is there subjectivity somewhere? And what are we, and how are we dealing with it when it comes to acknowledging that there is ideology? And the point for me is to be quite clear. There is no Islamic studies without acknowledging the fact that behind science, there is always an ideology. Accepted, exposed, or not. But this idea that there is science without subjectivity, and from subjectivity, ideology, is just, first, a wrong scientific statement per se. It never happens, and we have to acknowledge this. So that cannot be true, and as we know, now we are coming with something which is coming from all the universes of philosophy, dealing with the theories of knowledge, the theories of sciences, that what we know about epistemology that is so important, which is what is behind the statement and scientific positioning. I'm saying this is objectivity. There is nothing like this. And this is where in our modern world and postmodern reality, we have to be quite clear about how do we position ourselves in the whole discussion when it comes to philosophy of sciences. The problem now, and this is the fourth point of my introduction, is that if we come to deal with Islamic sciences, we can see that Muslim scholars and Muslim intellectuals are torn apart the traditional way of dealing with it and the Western way of dealing with it. So we are in between. And in between, on the one hand, asserting a very traditional way of teaching. This is our tradition, this is us, refusing anything which has to do with the modern world and modernist and of course, postmodern approach. And on the other hand, when it comes to science, we want to compete with the West and we want to be involved in the discussion by saying, yes, it's scientific because this is our frame of reference. Trying also to deal with very critical discussion. The point is that the whole discussion here is what about the limits? Is to draw the limits between the traditional and contemporary. And on this, I might say, if you listen and if you try to get a sense of what is produced by Muslim scholars and intellectuals, the least that we can say is that the line and the limits are not clear. So we are traditional when we want to protect, and we are modern when we want to prove. What do we want to prove is not clear. What we want to protect is not clear. So here we have something and I'm talking here not about only the discourse. I'm talking here about Islamic studies. So the academic discourse, the academic framework, what we are talking about when we have, for example, like we have here, a faculty of Islamic study. This is what I want to refer to. Now, having said this, I said 4 main elements at the beginning. The sources, the means, the substance, the means, and the goals. In the way we deal with science, what I would propose now to this evening for all of us is to start by the end. Meaning that when it comes to science and to try to get an object of science, what is very important for us is to define science through the object as well as through the goal. And especially when it comes to what we are referring to. Because Islamic sciences has to do with Islamic. And if the object of what is Islamic is the scriptural sources, Al-Quran wal-Ahadith, these are the scriptural sources, that what the consensus among the scholars, unfortunately, by the way, I would say unfortunately, is that our sources are only scriptural. For me, today, I think that this is one of the biggest problems that we have in the Islamic contemporary thinking, but not only. Throughout our history is to think that the texts are the source and forgetting that the world is also a source. The universe, the creation. Which in fact, if we were to come to this, we would reconcile the Islamic tradition with all the spiritual tradition around the world to the West even, where we find now people coming back to this very essential element of what is the source of your thinking. When I'm saying this, I'm saying that let us come to the consensus. I don't want to start straight away by dividing the audience. Come with me, Al-Quran wal-Ahadith. We agree on that. Having said that, coming now to this, what do we have in the message? It's a message, and the message, it's coming with something which is essential. The first element of the message is the truth that is the starting point of everything. And this truth is essential with anything that we are going to build afterward. And this is also something which could be our answer to the postmodernist approach, which is at-tawheed, that there is one God and he is the one who sent the scriptural sources. That's essential, even within academia. Because the people are saying, no, let us start with facts and not saying that behind the facts and behind what is called scientific facts, there is also an ideology. It's as ideological as saying there is one God. And I would say that I have no problem in academic setting to say, I start with this, and it doesn't undermine my capacity of being scientific. Which here, it's essential. Why? Because it's going to have an impact in the way we should be courageous enough to deal with anything which has to do with rationality, when rationally we start with a position of principle. But if Islamic studies is to deal with triple sources, it means that we are dealing with a message, and the message is coming from the one with something which is very important here, coming from the source, is that this message is calling humanity, it's calling human beings to a specific mission. And a specific mission means that everything which has to do, the backdrop behind the scientific positioning is what you have to do with your knowledge, what you have to do with your rationality is to respond to the call and to achieve goals. Meaning here that our definition of science is not the same as we can have in Western secularized setting. When science is defined by the object, here what you have, the object is saying, it's telling you that your science is also defined not only by the object, but also by the goals. Meaning that the true scientific approach is always to ask not only what is your object of knowledge, but what are your goals through the object, which is what the message is telling us. So you understand here that this understanding of knowledge is not in a void, an objectivity which does not exist, but the acknowledgement here that there is something which it's important. Meaning that the goals that we have also is through our sciences, because now I don't define science only through the object, but through the object and the goals. Which, in fact, it's a very simple dua, but I keep on repeating this. One day, in rational term, spiritual term, human term, we need to understand what is meant by the supplication, Allahumma nas'aluka ilman nafi'ah. Oh God, we are asking you useful knowledge. Not only knowledge, be careful, useful knowledge, knowledge for a goals, not so. Useful knowledge means that the knowledge by definition is a means and there is a goal which is to be useful. Useful to what? Something which is part of the way we deal with knowledge here is to reform the self and to reform the world. الذين إن مكناهم في الأرض أقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وآمروا بالمعروف ونهوا عن المنكر. There is something which is straight to the point that there is no knowledge without or disconnected from a moral qualification, the goal to reform the self and to reform the world. I'm saying this because I would like our Islamic studies to have this in mind, not by making it so academic that the substance of it, the backdrop, the background, the spiritual dimensions are not there, in the name of a scientific approach, which is only scientific by the means and not really scientific as to the background. And you will get me after this, I'm not undermining, I'm not underestimating the reality of what should be scientific, and you will see that there are some consequences to what I'm saying. So when it is said in the way we deal with the spiritual dimension, ولكن كونوا ربانيين مما كنتم تعلمون الكتاب ومما كنتم تدرسون. The fact that الرباني, once again, it's lots of scholars, and you go through all the Islamic tradition. Rabbani, it's a very polysemic dimension, but imbibed with God, having this God consciousness in everything that you are, in the way you are reading the book and in the way you are teaching it, has to do with the knowledge, which is imbibed with the meaning, which has to do with the goals, which has to do with the way you use your knowledge to achieve the goals. Once again, what I'm saying here is that there is from the very beginning, with this understanding that our sciences should achieve specific goals. So sciences are but means. The first undermining of Tawheed is to take the means for the end. So science per se as the goal of what you are doing. And this is something that, once again, I'm sorry to say that in many of our Islamic study program, we are celebrating the knowledge in itself as the goal itself and not as which should be, in fact, the means for something else. So the distortion here in the way we teach is also coming from what I'm talking here. What I'm referring to is that the spiritual dimension that we are talking about everywhere, and you know, it's as if you come to university, and in university you think with your brain, and then you leave the university and you start praying with your heart. I'm sorry, that's not the way I see it. You come with university with your heart, you think with your brain in the light of your heart, and this is exactly what it means, Rabbani. Rabbani, it's this backdrop, it's the unicity acknowledging the fact that there is no science without ideology, and my ideology has a point of reference, which is La ilaha illallah. So the Tawheed as something which is essential. But get me right, I would say in Western terms, this could be perceived as, oh, it's not really academic. I would say and go for the same critical take on many of the so-called academic settings in the West. And you will see behind it, you will find something which is the non-said, the non-acknowledged, which is what is behind the scientific structure. Because there is a rational take in anything that we are doing. So that's the first point that I wanted to say, starting with the goal. And now it comes with all what I'm saying, the way we look at sciences and the object of study, not only as means to achieve the goals, but very often as goals in itself. And as a consequence, there is something which is a distortion in our understanding. If we come to this overall perception of what Islam is all about, calling us to be what? In fact, the acknowledgement that the first truth is the Tawheed, and then after this, you have an understanding of how do you have to deal with science. And I will come to the point where it's not because we are starting with this principle that we have to be less rational. And this is one of the problems that we have. That what we have today in our faculties is either to be rational or rationalist. We avoid the first principle, or in the name of the first principle, we diminish the rational take in our study. And I would say it's a balance that we need to find again. Having said that, the whole understanding here, it's a notion that we need to get as human beings. Because in the way we teach Islamic science and Islamic studies, there is also something which is part of all what I'm saying. Science has to do with human being. What is our concept of human being? Because science, knowledge, has to do with humanity. What is our concept of humanity? And it comes here to integrate science into the status of the human being on Earth. So just one thing that I wanted to say at the beginning, I'm starting from very high. So now you might say, oh, this is very philosophical. It is, but I'm coming to the practical thing. But what I want to say, there is no university where there is a notion of universal without a philosophy of education, a philosophy of science. We can't just go for it and just... The problem that we have with our reforms in Islamic studies, you know what it is that we have structural reforms, not in-depth understanding of the challenges of the day. So I'm not talking about structural reform. I'm talking about an overall understanding, an in-depth understanding of what should be the challenge here. Having said that, there is a notion that we keep on repeating. It is completely distorted by ISIL and Daesh now when they are speaking about, or some other groups around the world when they are talking about al-Khilafah. And in Khilafah, it's when you understand the meaning of vicegerency, that you are not the owner of the earth, that everything that you will get out of knowledge should respond to the call and should respond to the message is that you have to respect this creation, and all your sciences should be based on the acknowledgement that there is an owner, and then yet you have to respect the rules, that you have to respect the owner and to achieve through your knowledge. So it means that all our sciences are coming into this understanding of this khilafa fil ard. Al-khilafa fil ard is all our knowledge should be as vicegerent to respond to the call. We are going to be autonomous as to the way we deal with knowledge, but we are not going to be autonomous in the way, or not accountable in the way, in moral terms, in ethical terms, in spiritual terms, we deal with our own knowledge. Once again, integrating Islamic studies into a concept of human being and a concept of life, a concept of, and a philosophy, as I said, of sciences and knowledge. And this is why I'm saying that what I'm proposing now and what I'm saying now, it's deeply spiritual in a kind of changing and putting spirituality where it should be. Spirituality has nothing to do, and you know, the way we are talking about, by the way, the concept of spirituality is very difficult in the classical and contemporary Islamic terminology to use. It could be Rabbaniya, it could be Tazkiyya, it could be all these concepts are here. So we are talking about a set of concepts that are interesting and important, polysemic as well. But my point here is to say the starting point of this spiritual revolution is to get a better understanding of what we are talking about when we are talking about the spiritual dimension of our knowledge. And it has to do with these two concepts here, which is one is the Khilafah, which is we are on earth by the name of the one trying to manage the earth and to try to manage the earth to just achieve goals. All sciences are means to achieve these goals, and this is in the concept of human being, the concept of divinity, and the concept of even the understanding of knowledge. So the light, the spiritual light, it's at the beginning, and every time with all the knowledge that we are teaching, everything that we are going to teach in the light of the goal, dealing with the facts of the object, the reality, the objectivity of the object itself, has to deal with responding to the call and achieving this by reforming the self, reforming the world, and responding to the call. I'm saying here that we should, at one point, consider the fact that we are asserting a concept of life, asserting a concept of human being, and coming and dealing with the facts in a rational way, but not without this background that is also projecting onto all the on all the sciences through the universe of reference. So, in our universities, and when we start, the fact that we might sometimes not be perceived, I can tell you something, is that the great majority of our scholars, if you go on Western terms of objectivity and academia, they would say that's not objective, that's not academia. These are preachers, they are not scientists, they are not scholars. You heard about this, that many of the people that you have, oh, this is preaching, this has nothing to do with science. And I would say that, in fact, we are in between. We call science sometimes positioning that are much more preaching about the truth. And sometimes this rejection of the West, as I said, is based on the fact that we don't like some rational questions that are put to us by the West. And I think we are in both situations we are wrong. So I would say here that in our universities, this first affirmed and asserted axis, that the truth is what we understand as there is one God with this reality. Our sources, by the way, not only the scriptural sources, but the universe itself, we have to deal with. But we understand that all our knowledges are means to achieve a goal, to reform our own self and to reform this world. And all the sciences, all the Islamic sciences are directed towards the same goal. And we give a meaning to science. And it's only with this, I would say, that if you have to deal with the postmodernist reality, you have a way to respond. Because if you have the access at the beginning and the goals as to the direction, this is where you are going to resist the temptation that we have in the postmodernist reality to destroy the truth and deconstruct the real, which is part of what we have in the post-modernist approach. So this is something that I want to start with by saying, in Islamic studies, are we able today, when it comes to teaching Islamic sciences, to come with this positioning? And anyone who is telling me, but this is ideological, I would say yes, as any positioning when it comes to sciences, when it comes to knowledge, when it comes to a philosophy of science. And to be assertive enough with this. Why? Because the consequences of what I'm saying here are going to be critical in the results, in the way we deal with the scriptural sources. And I will come to this now. Second part, the substance. I would say that as Muslim intellectuals and scholars today, and I can tell you through all my study, because what I went through the Western path, by the way. I'm coming from the Western schools, the secular schools, and then I went to Egypt, and I went to the other direction, which is the traditional, with the sheikh and repeating and trying, and this was it. So the work with the very traditional, sitting down, to getting the knowledge from the sheikh, on the other side, train in the West. And I wanted this, except that with one of two of my shuyukh, I used the means of the one to challenge the answers of the second in the traditional way. But there is something here which is clear when it comes to Islamic studies, when it comes here to what we have in our universities in the Muslim majority countries, as well as when it comes to the reality of our teaching. We have a problem. We have problems, in fact. And if I would put them, I would say that we have a problem with sciences. I started to speak about it. We have a problem with rationality. And we cannot deny that we have a problem with rationality. And when it comes to the rationality, very often we think about the dominant culture and the rationality coming from the West. And as I said, the question of the limits. Up to where are you able to question? Where can you push the limits? The third is clearly, take it as it is. The Islamic civilization and the Muslims today have a problem with history. And history is huge, huge history. Because this is where the eternal is challenged by the temporal. The conjectural and the changeable is challenging the immutable. We have a problem with history, to the point that I would say that we are quite bad in history. With our own history and the history of the others. But with our own history, there is a problem, and I will come to this. And we have another problem, willing it or not, which is this attraction, rejection with the West. Because we like it. We like the West. Even here, in the Islamic studies, they love the West. And at the same time, we don't like that we like the West. Which is the complexity of our identity today, which is called the identity crisis. No, but it's serious. It's serious. It has an impact on our psychology. It is an impact with the way we are equipped, or even sometimes badly equipped, to challenge the discussion. Because when you are emotionally driven, you are not rationally fit. You are not sharp in the terminology, in what you are trying, even about your own self. So, having said that, we have a problem with sciences, rationality, history, and the other, and mainly today the dominant West. Let me start with the first one. We have a problem defining science, and I said that. And there is here something which is the reality of the relationship between faith and rationality. Why? Because in the West, sciences start where faith has no place. Science is no, don't speak about faith. This is spiritual. And it could be private, it could be what, but science is not here. It's difficult for us to come to this position where we say, okay, the starting point, the light through which we look at all sciences is a position of principle that could be what I was just referring to as a tawheed and the truth as something which is the axis. I'm saying this being worried about what I see with Muslim students in the West, that they are so keen on showing that they are ready for rationality that there is no access. There is no access. And they think that this is science. And this is where it's problematic. Because when you are taught about the scientific dimension without the principles and the sources and what the whole philosophy and the theory of knowledge is missing when you are taught about knowledge, that's problematic. So this fracture and this selection in what you are taught, that's also the reality. And you have to open up your mind to get a better sense of what is happening, it's going on. It's not new, this tension between faith and rationality. But what is happening now is when we deal with the West, where we have two main things, as I said, this postmodern reality, where postmodern take on truth, there is no truth, and there is no longer reality. So the real and truth are destroyed from within. They are no longer reference. You cannot come and say this is truth. You know, in Wittgenstein, for example, the starting point of the whole philosophy and the analytical philosophy is, what are you talking about? I remember that one of our professors in philosophy in Geneva, it's analytical philosophy, is saying, you know what, theology is the only discipline where there is no object. By definition, there is no God. So they are talking about the absence. No object. And then, meaning that the philosophy of science and science is not with belief that you have to start, and it's the whole discussion. So what I was saying here is that it's not new. But the deconstruction of the real, it's exactly the same. It's the consequence of the absence of truth in the whole concept of the real today. Now, we come and we assert that the Quran is the very word of God. So this is the position, min al-aqidah, one of the pillars of our faith. As you know now that this is challenged by scholars and people, and you know that, for example, one of the discussion that happened with Nasr Hamid Abu Zaid was about the status of the Quran. The best answer that I heard and I read to this was coming from an anthropologist, in fact, dealing with the essence of what was behind, and it's the students of Talal Assad in the United States. What is her name again? Sawa Mahmoud, yes. So she wrote a very powerful article about this, which is very interesting, by saying there is something behind it. There is something which is presented as scientific, but with a very ideological take on touching the very principle of this is coming from God. Okay, we say this and we repeat this, but what we have another problem is, because we are dealing with the West in such a way, and as I said, we have a problem in science, we have a problem with the limits. It's coming from God, so this is part of our starting point. But the problem is not with the Quran. The problem is with, when it comes to faith and rationality, with the ahadith. In fact, it comes in our tradition about defining when starts the human agency. The human agency is what is coming beyond this first principle, which is the light to which we look at the world and say, here starts the human agency and the human construction. And if we are serious about the fact that the book is coming from God, we should be critical with everything which is coming from human beings. This is the only way it should be. And this is not the way we are dealing with our references. As I said, I'm somebody who is taking very seriously the fact that al-ahadith is sahih. It's sahih. But now, to have people to tell me, responding to the West, that the compilation of some scholars are undisputable, no discussion, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. How come? And I'm going to be very serious about the fact that I'm protecting the sacred of the Quran. It's coming from God, and that there are some ahadith that are authentic, but anything which is coming from a human agency and construction should be open to discussion. Not to deny the truth, but to check it. And not to say there is no mistake in one, and this infallibility that we can find in the human production is something that, so the problem is that in our history, and this is why I told you we have a problem with history, is where do you draw the limits between what is the immutable and what is open to the discussion? And I'm saying this because what I want also is, as much I'm serious about these are the very word of God. And in the ahadith, there are things that are not disputable. I'm completely against, in our Islamic studies, against the people who are saying, no, we don't need the sunnah. No, that's not, for me, it's not acceptable. But it doesn't mean that because we need the sunnah, we are not going to check everything and to go so far in our scientific take on anything which is coming from human beings, because this is exactly what the Quran is expecting from us. Check it. Check what is coming. So we stopped in our history because it was the way for us to protect what we thought is part of the truth. And I would say here we have to be reassessing this in a very serious way. I mean by this, to be critical with any human production. And this, to reaffirm the principle of truth and not to be scared and apologetic. It means also that to do this, there is only one way, is also to have Islamic studies where the teachers are as courageous as the students, or the other way around, to have students as courageous as teachers, ready for the questions, ready to assess and to go further. And I mean also by this, that it's not just, it's a serious matter here. If you want to check as anyone in a specific scientific field, you have to be equipped. So now you want to check and you want to discuss the hadith, you have to be trained. You have to go for it. Not just, oh, I have to come closer? Okay. What time do I have still?
You have 10 minutes.
Wow. That's the first part. Okay. I was sure that I was going to go quicker than that. Anyway. I think you got my point. If you didn't get my point, you will have questions. Now, having said that, still, the truth is truth and the limits are the limits. And once again, in Islamic studies, I have been trained at the beginning very much in the fiqh, because this is where I thought at the beginning the challenge was. After 25 years, I realized that I reached limits. Fiqh, it's essential, but it's not the key of the problem. The problem is deeper than that and wider than that. So this is why I'm coming to this discussion with you today. And the problem is that many scholars are coming and saying now that we have a problem with what is coming from the human agency and the rules. And there is now something which is a new trend, which has to do with al-maqasid, the maqasidiyun. It's to think about the objectives, which is very important. It's very important, but not at the price of the limits, not at the price of the access, to the point that some are so obsessed with the goals that we don't know if there is a source. And in fact, is responding sometimes to the Western challenge that, oh yes, we have the same goals. But I'm sorry, the same goals doesn't mean that we have the same principle, and sometimes the apparent same principles are not exactly the same. Because some are also so rationally put that there is no reference to any spiritual and overall goal that we have. And this is exactly the opposite, I would say, from the intuition of al-Juwayni, of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, of al-Shatibi, even to our contemporary, Ibn Ashur. This is not the way they were looking at, they were very much thinking about the comprehensive way. It's never thinking about the maqasid without thinking about the source and understanding how they use the means. So the three things were together. So the point that we have now is that some, to avoid the means, to avoid the rules, to diminish the assertiveness as to the principle, are now speaking very much about the maqasid. And it's dangerous. It's nice because it means that we can reform, we can go ahead, but it's dangerous if we don't have it dawabit, if we don't have the conditions, if we don't have the whole thing. So I would say here that we have also to be very cautious with reform that are structural, and sometimes we think they are substantial, but it's problematic in the way we deal with it. So we need a kind of reconciliation with our own universe of reference. And it's, once again, it's not new, but now it's very critical because the West is here and we are in the West. And then we have Islamic studies, and then we have to get with a comprehensive understanding. What do we want? What is science? And what do we want to achieve through the knowledge? That's something which is essential. And, you know, when you come to the West, you understand that, you know, it's not by accident. Then when you come to the West and say, you know what, the Islamic tradition was great, there is one example, Ibn Rushd. They would never, ever mention Ibn Taymiyyah. Very rarely they will refer, we have some scholars now who are working on Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, it's a great mind, but it's still marginal in anything which has to do with contemporary philosophy. We don't teach this. That's exotic. But Ibn Taymiyyah is just the one who is the thinker who is influencing the Salafi. There are many things that we can say, but there is one intuition that he had very early, that we need to get from the very beginning, that his problem with the Greek tradition was that the logic within the Greek tradition was alien to the Islamic mantiq and the Islamic framework. That's something that if you come to his book about al-aql wal-naql, it's something which is essential, that in fact he had the perception, the understanding. And you know who said this quite recently, after 50, 60 years of studying Western philosophy? Somebody who is completely demonized, or was completely demonized in the West for one of his books on Israel, and this book I didn't like. I didn't like the book of Roger Garaudy that he wrote about, and he spoke to me before writing it. He knew that he was going to create a controversy. I didn't like this book. But there is another book when he is talking about his own philosophical journey throughout the century. And he's coming with a very deep, critical discussion about the Greek concept of being and this, the whole understanding and the concept that he was studying in the West and saying there was a problem from the very beginning. The problem is in the concept itself. I'm saying this because this is where, in our discussion, we have to be critical in the way we deal with rationality, and we understand what is, from within, our take on the relationship between text and reason, and also the way we have to open up again this discussion. It's a shame, it's not acceptable in any faculty of Islamic studies not to have and not to teach philosophy, not to teach this understanding of the means and the understanding of concept of human being, concept of universe, and concept of science. That's not possible. If you don't do this from within, somebody is going to do it for you. You are going to be alienated from outside by trying to compete with a universe of reference. We have to reconcile. So practically speaking, check your curriculum in any faculty of Islamic studies. Because this is where it started, and this is where the discussion, and I'm saying this by even saying, for example, in the way we are teaching al-madahib, between Abu Hanifa and Malik, they are not only methodologies that we are dealing with. Al-fiqh al-taqdiri, the way Abu Hanifa was looking at the reality was completely different from the way Malik was looking at it. It's a mindset, it's not a methodology. A methodology is the translation of a way of looking at the reality. When you think about what if, it's completely different in the way you deal with the reality when you speak about, I don't care about, if it didn't happen, I don't care. Think about this subjectivity translating a methodology. This is something that we have to discuss. Don't come only with the rules. This is the formalistic way of teaching even the madahib. That's a problem. So here, this is where we have a problem with, as I said, science, rationality, and then we have a problem with history. I don't have, that. Hopefully you know that. The way we are dealing with the history, the political history of the Islamic civilization is completely distorted in the way we teach it. The scientific history with our scholars is distorted in the way we are dealing with it. And this is something which, once again, comes also with the way we are dealing with the scriptural sources. Whereas, in fact, the book, Al-Quran Al-Karim, the immutable book, was revealed into history by telling us, you human being, we are not going to get the essence, the meaning of this book if you don't get a sense of history with it. Now it has to do the same with the hadith. Why, for example, some scholars in a very specific period of time, they took this as very quickly as potentially true, sometimes in the methodology of saying this is sahih and this is haram, this is sahih or this is da'if. There are things that have to be checked. The historical discussion here. So what is coming from the West, putting things into historical context, checking through history, this is something that we have to do. And more importantly, to stop this idealization of our political and our scientific past, which is now having as an impact that we don't discuss these things in the right way. Yes, I know I have to go quickly. So, okay, so this is something which, I'm sorry, I have no time to, I had other points, but I just want to come to the West, the problem that we have. And in the way we are teaching, if you want a consistency, if you want a coherence from within our teaching, there is something which is essential. It's the holistic approach which we have to protect as to the unity of the source and the goals that we are talking about. So there is no way in our teaching, if we are not going through what we call Islamic sciences and get transdisciplinary approaches. The transdisciplinary is that in what we are experiencing now, it's exactly the same as in the West when we talk about the fragmentation of knowledge. We have now scholars who are specialized in a field. They cannot compete in anything which is beyond their field. And if you are in this situation, you can be very nice, very good, very powerful in your field, but you are not going to challenge the reality. You can just challenge other questions and other answers in your field, but not in reality. So this competition within, without having answers outside, this is something that we have. And in our way of teaching Islamic studies, this is where we need to have a reassessment of not only the curriculum in every single field, but the way we are teaching these fields and the way we are making them in a dialogical way, talking to one another. So this is where, if we are dealing with this, the only thing that we are trying to do is and we have good examples for this, is when it comes to economics, for example, to show that with our Islamic means, we can compete with the dominant economy. So we come with technical things. I'm sorry, if we are serious with the first truth, and we know about the goals, the problem is not to try the means for this system, is to question the whole goals of the system itself. It doesn't mean that we have the answers, but at least the problem in Islamic studies now is not to have the answer for everything, at least to have the good questions. At least to have the good questions. So help. We need to help our students, and we need to help ourselves as intellectuals and scholars to come with the right question. And in fact, not to fall into the trap to compete and to try to catch up. And this is why I think with somebody like, and I have been talking, we had a very critical dialogue from far, reading his books and trying to get a sense of what he's saying. Said Hussein Nasr, when he's saying, if you go that way, if all your reform is about to modernize, it's over. No, this is not the way. So he is against reformists, but in fact, reformists which implicitly means to go towards something which is not more rationality, but void rationality. No principles at the beginning, no goals as to science should achieve something. And he's refusing this. And I think that we have to take this seriously. We have to take this seriously in the way we are dealing with our teaching. And I will come to my conclusion with the last part. Once again, I'm trying to summarize as much as I can. But now, this part was mainly about the means. So I talked about the substance, I talked about the science and about the means. And if we look at the way we are teaching now, it's a very narrow spectrum of disciplines with no real holistic approach. So let us be serious about this. Any one of you who has or had gone through Islamic studies, at the end, with all these disciplines, which type of holistic approach and understanding you have? Once again, it's the way for us to be able to deal with our own tradition. Get me right. I'm not here talking about challenging the West. In fact, it's the other way around. I'm talking about challenging ourselves. Challenging the very essence of what we call sciences. When you say Islamic sciences, what do you mean? Islamic studies, what do you mean? What is the principle? What are the principles? What are the means? What are the goals? How do you construct this science? What are the relationships between the different sciences that you have? What is this holistic understanding? Or are you destroying everything? So at the end, you are as scattered as some of the Western sciences. And as I told you, once we invited Edgar Morin, who came here from France, and he was saying one of the big problems that we have now is the fragmentation of knowledge. There is no way. There is no qibla. There is no direction. There is no way, Sharia. This is what I told him, Sharia. He smiled, half a smile. Anyway, but that's the reality for our discussion about the holistic approach. And this is where, once again, in our Islamic studies, the transdisciplinary approach should be part of the curriculum. But not only this. You can't today, in fact, it was never possible to define yourself, to get to a deep understanding of who you are and what you want if you are not interacting with others, which is the very meaning of the verse of the Quran. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. This mutual knowledge has to do with knowledge, has to do with science, has to do with understanding the logic of the other. Not only your culture, but your mind, your mindset, your way of dealing with knowledge, your concept of human being. And this is why in any Islamic study curriculum, in any faculty of Islamic studies, we need to have Western studies. We need to have this. We need to be equipped with this understanding of how do they deal with this? How do they define science? How to define human being? Anthropology. And sometimes people who might, I'm sorry, if you tell me, in Islamic studies, the only one who have to teach are Muslims, forget it. Do something else. Of course not. It's not possible. Islamic studies is about all the sciences. It's about knowledge. So when, for example, I learn about the secular mindset, about secularism, you can't have a right sense of what secularism is under colonization because it's distorted. The relation of power means that you can't get it. But now you have to have teachers. You have to have people understanding from within the logic of it. So anthropology, for example, it's something which is important. Read Talal Assad in everything which has to do with anthropology and with secularism. And the way he's dealing from within with the whole concept. And then you say, oh, it's not as simple as this. In fact, mind you, the West is as complex as Muslims are. And it's very complex. It is. So I would say here that in our curriculum, we need here, I spoke about philosophy, anthropology, human sciences. These are things that are very important. Gender. And please, don't reduce the gender studies into, it's just to destroy the Islamic universe of reference. It's about denying what is a man and what is a woman. That's not serious. It's as if somebody is coming to you, psychoanalysis is Freud. I say, what have you studied? This is pure ignorance. You can't do that with psychology, for example. So I would say that we have to think about opening up what we teach and who is teaching. Not only we need Muslim teachers, but we need non-Muslim teachers, and let me put it the right way, not Muslim, people of other faiths, people of other affiliation, people who are not Muslims, people who come with another understanding, from within their own understanding, and they are challenging. This is where you are challenged. I learned in the West with Westerners. And the way you are faithful to your Islamic studies is to get the right principles, but also the right way to interact. Because the others, because the people who are not from your universe of reference, if you are solid, they are helping you to be better. That's everything that you have in the Quran. وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. All this is there. But we have to have it in our universities, not just as preachers, as thinkers, as teachers, not preachers, as teachers. That's something which is essential in the way we are dealing with this experimental sciences. We have in our centers, we came with scholars of the text and the context, and we came with physicians, and we met them, we put them with ulama. And at the end, you know what is the big question? We don't agree on the definition of health. Start now thinking about it. Human being, a person, what it means to be stable, what to be a balanced human being. We don't agree on that. What is sickness? So this is where, if you come with this dynamic, I have been I have been calling for let's the scholars come together, ulama al-waqan, and then I just realized over the last 3 years that it was deeper than that. They don't have the same understanding, they don't have the same terminology. It's too different. So we have to start before. We have to start with exposing our students, exposing ourselves to our own critical take and also the other. And as I said, be careful. I'm not talking as only something which has to do with the West. And by the way, I would like to have this with the Chinese civilization, with the Eastern civilizations as well. Not only the West. This obsession with the West is distorting. But this is why we have to open up. And for us, as I said, the transdisciplinary approach, it's important. And I would say it has to do with science, it has to do with physics. It's the poverty of our contemporary contribution to anything which has to do with the environment, except referring to one verse, one hadith. Islam is all about. No, I'm sorry, that's not the point. That we have to take تسبح له السماوات السبع والأرض ومن فيهن. When you have verses saying to سبح لله ما في السماوات, when these starting verses, the whole understanding is that this world is connected to praising Allah. ولكن لا تفقهون تسبيحهم. You don't understand. This is why we have to come with a concept of human being, the khilafah, the vicegerency on earth, with a very powerful. But we want students to be involved in this. To do this, you have to be rooted in your tradition. Listen to what is coming from others. This is Islamic studies. If not, this is studies that are isolated Islamic studies based on protection, not on contribution. Based on differentiation, not on principle. And then with this, my conclusion. First, very quickly, I said it once at the beginning, but I really think that when it comes to the source, the only way forward in Islamic studies is really not to reduce the sources of Islamic studies to the scriptural sources. It's wider than that. And I would say that that in radical reform, I'm challenging the fuqaha. I'm challenging even usul. For me, usul al-fiqh was an asset. It was a necessary take, and then it is problematic today in the way we deal with the text. But I would say here that a holistic approach, it's requiring from us to reassess the sources. What are the sources? And the universe is one. Spirituality as the first reality and not something which is coming on marginal. Why am I saying this? Because we are ending up doing exactly the same. You know what we have in the West? We have committees of ethics coming with a spiritual take on what is good and what are the limits. We are doing exactly the same. In fact, what is the efficiency? Let us be frank. We want Islamic studies. We might hope that we are going to have scholars, and the scholars are going to come with fatwa and ethical advice or direction. At the end, it's very marginal. The impact on the fatwa, or the impact on the ethical Islamic discourse today on the Muslim behavior, it's marginal. So it's exactly we are following in the footsteps by being here in a very problematic way. As I said, the third point is that we have to be quite clear on differentiating what is coming from the divine and the immutable and what is coming from the human agency. And I'm serious about this. It means courage to discuss. And here, based on this understanding that the whole way of dealing with, we call for ijtihad, and ijtihad, you know, the creative autonomous reasoning, ethically driven. This is also something which is important, that our ijtihad, we have to qualify ijtihad here. Because we can end up having an ijtihad which is a utilitarianist ijtihad to protect some interest. No, it's ethically driven, and it has to be creative and autonomous. And to do this, this, I would say, in our own way of thinking about science and studies and Islamic studies, the first would be now to decolonize our mind from first the weight of the tradition in the way we are repeating, because I'm sorry, there is part in our Islamic studies, there is part of something which is taqleed. And from the other side, the structural reform that we think are renewal, and it's completely obsessed with what the West is doing. So we are torn apart, taqleedi not really fitting to the real, and westernization that is not faithful to the principle. And I would say that this is where kind of a spiritual and intellectual revolution is needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tariq, for your insights and for your valuable knowledge that you shared with us tonight on, let's say, three parts of the topic: the source, the substance, and the means. The floor now is open for the questions and answers. So we will have this first list of questions, and then if we have more time, then I will be taking more questions. So we start first by Brother Muhammad. Please go ahead.
شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tariq. As regards the first part of your lecture, I understood that you are calling for an impact of science on the heart and our feelings. How can this be? Can it be scientific if we study the impact of science? Are you asking us to turn our religious feelings into scientific subjects? You talk about credibility, but you do not give us any standards for that, because you're emanating from within internal dimension. If we apply that to science, how can we find standards for credibility and judge whether this is right or wrong, science or not science, as long as that the standard becomes internal and not external? As for the last part of your reference to traditions which are considered authentic, sahih or not, I don't think you're calling for studying the chain of narration, but maybe you are calling for a discussion or a review of the content. What is new about this call? What is the new concept that you are calling for when we try to understand or study the content of the hadith and the context? Thank you, Mr. Muhammad.
المتحدث الثاني, the second speaker, your brother.
Assalamu alaikum.
عليكم السلام.
Excellent stuff. Thank you very much. You mentioned quite a lot, but what I want to ask you is, you talk about the courage of students and scholars and teachers. You talk about the openness, and you talk about the difference between our discourse and the Western discourse. But the one element that I thought is a little missing is our freedom, which is overused, I admit. But it's a major difference between our world and the Western world. A scholar and a student and just a regular Muslim cannot be courage enough to question or criticize anything if his life, nothing less than his life, is at stake. You mentioned Nasr Hamid Abu Zaid. You disagree with him, I disagree with him. But look what happened to him. He ended up saying all what he wants to say in a foreign land, away from his own land. for me, as a normal human being, if I need to read anything serious right now about Islam, I have to go to the West. There is nothing in the Islamic world that trigger my mind to rethink anything. And the main reason is not a lack of scholars, it's not a lack of knowledge, it's not a lack of quality of researcher and human being, it is lack of freedom. That is the word. That's the difference. Your views. Thank you.
Thank you. Third question, yes.
أشكر بفكر
I thank Dr. Tariq Ramadan for this lecture, and I'm sure he's speaking from the bottom of his heart. We hear that Dr. Tariq Ramadan, and from his mind too. When we talk about the sources of legislation, he stressed on the Quran and the Sunnah, but he also talks about the reality and the universe. Although Dr. Tariq Ramadan confirms and asserts that the Quran is the word of God, but also studying the reality and the universe, and sometimes can call us to cancel the Quran as a sacred source, and when the Quran talks about the difference between males and females, but now the financial burden is one and the same on both. Also, the criminal code in Islam, or hudud, what the Quran stipulates and the Sunnah, are they only of historical nature, and can they be substituted with more modern answers? And also Dr. Tariq Ramadan also talked about colonialism. This is good and fine, but the Islamic studies were distorted by the colonial powers and its affiliates. The Islamic studies are taught in a traditional Islamic way. For example, teaching the four schools of thought, the four madhabs, is no longer there in the Muslim world. So how can we teach madhab or schools of thought? And the way we have it now is we're no longer able to deal with the traditional way or the Western way. So, and everything is presented in a distorted manner, and therefore the extremists now find this way of teaching things, and which is totally undisciplined. Number 4, Mubarak.
Assalamu alaikum. First, I would like to thank Dr. Tariq Ramadan for his great and exceptional speech. My question is, I think we need to clarify and define some concepts relating to Islam, like Khilafah and Islamic State. If we look into Quran and Sunnah, there is no text ordering Muslims to make a Khilafah, a state or Islamic State. There is only verse ayah in Surah An-Nisa ordering us to rule with justice, not to establish a Khilafah or Islamic State. God said, وَإِذَا حَكَمْتُم بَيْنَ النَّاسِ فَاحْكُمُوا بِالْعَدْلِ. So we have to clarify the concept. My question is, why these concepts like Khilafah and Islamic State, which is not available in either Quran or Sunnah, is not clarified or not defined by Muslim scholars and left ignored for all this time, and now it's coming and is haunting us and causing us a lot of problems. This is my question. Thank you.
Yeah. Hannah. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dr. Ramadan, for this good lecture. We need it. Regards to the title of this lecture, Revolution. I came here and I thought we will discuss how much we can change. What the field we need to change. I thought that. Because I think after 10 years now of studying Islamic studies, as I studied before fiqh, then public policy in Islam, and a lot of reading, I think we need to reform or to re-establish our societies. Before, we were weak until Western occupied us. Then we become as a followers for them now. Do you think that is my question. Do you think if we developed our countries and we become more powerful and more independent, do you think we, at that time, we will need to think a lot about our principles and all of this? Or we are digging in that past to try to find something, tell us we are good, we have great history, and we don't need anything to make it more. Just criticize Western. To criticize Western will never change us. That's why I thought that this lecture will deal about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Salam. Yeah, تفضل. Salam.
Can I ask a question?
No, Salam. No, you're after. Okay. Okay, go ahead, and then go ahead, sister, and then brother Salam after.
Okay, Dr. Ramadan, thank you so much for this great lecture. And thank you for asserting the need to question certain methodologies and question our understanding of hadith and human agency. In your invitation for a process to reform the methodologies and the approaches of studying Islam, whether the text and the ahadith and the sunnah in general, how can progressive scholars convince society and the common man of the difference between the authority of the text, the Quran, and the authority of the human agency? Because so many people, when you start to explain to them that there is a huge difference between the interpretation of the text and the human agency, as you have referred to it, and the sacred text itself, you pretty much end up being called an infidel when you start questioning the authority of the people who collected the ahadith and who started interpreting the ahadith and the sunnah in certain times according to certain situations and circumstances. I guess what I'm trying to understand from you and take your advice on is how to revolutionize our approaches to Islamic studies now without ending up being, called an infidel. Thank you.
Salam.
السلام عليكم. الو السلام عليكم. بالحقيقة من أحد
Actually, among the main developments and progress in the Muslim world and the challenges is to revise our understanding of the Holy Quran in light of the scientific modern discoveries in so many fields, not only the scientific or the physical, but rather at the level of society and general laws. So one of the brothers here said that reform of our understanding the Quran does not mean that we criticize the ruling of cutting off the hand of the thief, But the renewable understanding of the Quran and the reformed understanding of the Quran should take the universal understanding of Quran, because it is the everlasting miracle fit for every time and every age. Unfortunately, the Muslims for over centuries have put a barrier between them and Islam. There is fear among some Muslims of thinking and contemplating the Quran, but they should replicate what the people in the past have said, and they don't have the courage to understand Quran in the light of modern science and modern jurisprudence and fiqh. That doesn't mean changing the rulings, which some scholars are afraid of. Renewing our understanding of the Quran is to find the miracles of this Quran and the basics of which the Muslim world should and could develop in the modern age. That's a point. Another point, anyone who attacks the authentic books of the Hadith or the Hadiths therein and say that they are contradictory with the Quran or the modern science, in most of their books, this is because they don't understand the Hadiths or the interpretation of those Hadith in a way that does not contradict the Quran nor contradicts modern science. So the lack of understanding on their side is what has led them to say that these sayings or Hadiths are contradictory of the Quran or modern sciences, while in fact most authentic Hadiths, except just a few with a right interpretation, would not contradict the Quran nor contradict modern science, but they are in complete congruency. Also, among the fundamentals of the Islamic scientific revolution is a science which is neglected. It is called Islamic eschatology, which is a neglected kind of discipline, and the Quran has spoken quite a lot about it, and also the Hadiths have spoken about. And searching in that is just like something misguided, while it is purely scientific and full of laws as if they are rules and laws of mathematics. Thank you. Tamim?
Jazakallah khair, Doctor.
May Allah reward
I just
you,
have a quick
Dr.
question. In relation to the love-hate relationship, I think that you mentioned that the West has, or the Muslims have with the West. I think you identified it, and it's a very important point, and I think it's a cause for a lot of the extremist behavior that occurs from Muslims in the West. Why do you think it came about, and how can we go about remedying it? You know, this cognitive dissonance. I think the love-hate relationship, I think that a lot of Muslims feel towards the West. Thank you.
Okay, so the sister in the back, yes.
In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful. Thank you, Dr. Tariq Ramadan. I agree with you completely that we do need an intellectual revolution that restores the fundamentals of what is fundamental in this discipline, and to restore our thinking of dealing with this approach and the way of thinking that would lead us to the proper implementation. We need to understand ourselves more, and in our discourse with ourselves, and to deal with the gaps between what is contemporary and what is tradition in what we have received in our faith and creed. But the hadith, the sacred hadith, discussing it remains a discussion between what is matan and sanad as a complementary of the revelation, but to interpret it and explain it and it's dealing with the modern reality is the deficit that we have now, when we insist that the idea that we want to deal with issues is through authentic hadith. reading history also needs revisiting over and over, and maybe we have left this field for others to distort our history, and which has led to our lack of understanding of our own history in contemporary life. Thank you.
Sister Nusayba.
Oh, okay. So my question was actually a comment. Unfortunately, my husband couldn't be here to demonstrate, but he will hopefully be here after to talk about something important that he's been working on. So I want you just for a moment to, since we're talking about revolution, to imagine walking into the masjid with your mother or father who needs a chair to pray. Now, their experience in the masjid today is not the best. Chairs are seen as a disturbance in the prayer, and they cause disorder in the prayer line. Now imagine a chair that could take virtually no space and offer complete stability and completely revolutionize the masjid experience for the elderly, pregnant, disabled, the injured, and so on. This chair could not only go in the masjid, it could completely revolutionize chairs everywhere. My spouse has been working on this chair for 4 months at QSTP earlier this year, and he actually built the prototype for this chair. And he is competing in the Stars of Science, and Friday is the finale, so we are voting for him to win the prize to actually make this chair, put it in the market, and revolutionize the masjid experience for people who need chairs to pray. If you'd like to vote, please, if you have Orido, you can text this number. It's 92898. If you have Orido, again, the number is 92898. Just text the number 3. Text the number 3. The number is 9. Wait, we have Vodafone. The number for Vodafone is 97736. The number for Vodafone is 97736.
Thank you.
Vote for Senda. 3 for Senda.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. I invite Dr. Tariq to answer all the questions in 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Can I ask an actual question, please? Because the last one was a comment.
Well, in less than a minute. The very last question in less than 1 minute, please.
Yes, it's very short. Okay, so you discussed how behind all knowledge is ideology, and the assumption is ideology is constructed by our identity. So isn't the first step towards this intellectual revolution is to address the identity crisis you mentioned? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. The floor is yours, Dr. Tariq.
Bismillah. So, look, I'm trying, as I have only 10 minutes, I'm going to, for so many questions, I'm going to take them not in the order they were put, just to go quickly on some of them. You said something at the beginning, speaking about freedom. And I want to start with this, because I would say that is critical. And it's the starting point of everything. We are not going to be serious within academia if we don't acknowledge the fact that freedom is the starting point. Now we see things that are happening after the Arab Spring or during the so-called Arab Spring, where people were saying al-hurriya qabla al-sharia, so freedom comes first. Within academia and in Islamic studies, if we are not protecting freedom and the right to questions, that's not going to work. So I really think that within the academic setting, the starting point, and by this I come to your question, which is connected to this. It's always the way we are asking what should come first. We change the society, and it's a two-way process. At the end of the day, you are not going to have educational institutions that are in fact open for critical thinking and helping us to reform for the better if there is no freedom for the society, there is no civil society. So wherever we are in Muslim majority countries, the civil society as a concept is important because this is where the independent educational institutions are working, and freedom, it's a prerequisite. And it means also, because you are all sitting here who also can agree with us, but I would ask you to be consistent with this, is how much are you putting of your intellectual energy to protect the freedom of people with whom you disagree? In political terms, in academic terms, in daily life. That's also something which I think it's a question. I come to your question about al-Khilafah. That was not my point. I was not talking at all about, I think the Khilafah as only a political concept is a reduction distortion. Al-Khilafah, it's a concept of the place of human beings within the creation. إِنِّي جَعْلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. It's just the understanding here of our status as vicegerents. This is what I was talking about. And what I'm talking about here is to refuse the political instrumentalization of Khilafah into reducing it as a relation of power towards human beings. No, it's the way you deal with the creation. It's the way you deal with سَبَّحَ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. All these verses that are سَخَّرَ لَكُم مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. It's the situation where we should not deny the fact that we have power, but we have no ownership. And then comes everything which has to do with the rejection of the political instrumentalization of this. You know, I'm coming from a family where the concept of Islamic State was central. Why are you laughing? I don't have, yes, and I am proud of it. The problem for me is I also take this as something that we have to put into historical context. When you are facing the British colonization and you want to free your country, you come with a concept by saying, our reference is not yours. Get out of here. And they were right on this. Britain had nothing to do with in Egypt, as no colonizers have the right to be on the lands of others. And up to now, this is what is happening with Israel. This is a colonial project. That's the problem. The starting point of everything is there. Now, to respond to the political model by saying we have our own reference, and at the end we have to Islamize the individuals and then the society and then the political structure, was a way at the nation state level to respond to colonization. So it's understandable as a response in historical terms. Now, do we have something which we can qualify as an Islamic state based on what? That's the problem. So this is the problem I may have now with, if you read the book, that was completely distorted in the media in the way I was putting things. It's about the Arab awakening. This is things that I'm discussing deeply as what could be the next step. But the concept of Islamic State, for me, it's problematic. And now even for some of the Islamists, it's became problematic to the point that they are saying, yeah, Islam is Dawla Madaniyya. So what it is exactly, is there a model? I don't know a model. I don't. So I have a problem with the concept. But this was not what I was referring to here. But thank you for helping me to clarify if somebody had the impression that I was a supporter of Daesh. You are saving my life. So this is something which is important. The second thing which was also important was also when I'm talking about al-kawn and al-kawn, or I'm talking about al-waqa. No. You don't get me wrong. I'm not diminishing المصدر الأساسي القرآن and الأحكام هي الأحكام. لا يعني بالنسبة لي يعني الأمر واضح. Now what I'm saying about your two questions here is it's the masdar, the source, and I refer here to something that, in fact, the first who came to me with this was Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. It's the way we look at the universe and the way we look at the rationality, not to undermine the al-ahkam, but to understand that the universe has a role to play. But don't get me wrong in the fact that as a source, the universe is something that we have to understand. And I'm saying this in the way we have to deal with history, in the way we have to deal with the natural rules and the natural laws and all these things. So this was what I meant by that. What's new in the... No, that's exactly where I have a problem with many of the Westerners. When we are talking about al-aqidah, when we are talking about the principles on which we build science, these are not shu'ur, these are not emotions, these are not perceptions, this is not only subjectivity. But to acknowledge the fact that there is no absolute objectivity and that we are basing this on principles. This is where, in fact, at the end of the day, look at this. If you have read Immanuel Kant wrote a very important, essential book on the critique of the pure reason. And then it's very much based on something which is, okay, I am avoiding anything which has to do with the principle of faith. It came afterward with the critique of the practical reason. But at the end, when you read everything, behind the rationality, all the people who studied Immanuel Kant based on rationality are talking about the idealism of Immanuel Kant. There is something which is coming not from the pure rationality. And it's acknowledged as such. From an Islamic perspective, we don't have a problem with this. And we should not accept any claim coming from so-called rationalists that when we start by saying there is a belief, there is asl, aqidah, that these are not shu'ur. These are part of something that we can call the truth. And now, build on this, something which is rationally solid, it's not in opposition. And then what is new in the way I was talking about the hadith? I'm not, and this is why also I come to your question, and I will answer the two questions together. I'm not following you in one thing which is important, because I have a problem with the concept of progressive Muslims, because I sometimes. Anyway, I don't want to enter into this discussion now, but I want just to say something about the hadith. No, the hadith, it's essential to understand Islam and to understand the Quran and to understand the rules. And when we go for the critical analysis of the sihah or the authentic hadith as to the sanad and the matn, which is the substance, I think that on this that there are serious studies and I rely on them. But I don't want limits telling me, you know what, for example, in Al-Bukhari with Muslims, you don't touch this. And there is no specialist who can touch this, because this is by definition sahih. I say, I'm sorry. I want to go for checking the sanad, the matn, and to have a discussion on this. Because I'm not saying that on this, and this is where we might disagree, my point is sahih, and we have to be serious about this. But the question is, there is no final and absolute decision to be made in history about the fact that we have to go and to check and to carry on checking. And especially now that we have more and more means to go through the people, the transmitters and all this. So it's an ongoing process. And I would specialists in ahadith to be involved in this, not people who have no say or no knowledge on it, and just to come and to say, oh, you know what, the Quran is the only reference. But we have problems. We really have problems with some of the rules and some. And by the way, not only some of the, apparently opposition between science and the matn, for example, the substance. No, even about the rules, even about our understanding of the rules, even about the understanding of some of the principles. And I would say I wouldn't in the name of the very essence of this understanding of the main principle of Islam, the Tawheed, and the central, first, immutable position or status of the Quran, that we can, after this, get the substance of the ahadith and to check the authenticity and also the consistency sometimes as to, and I would say that this has to be done. So I would say, as a man, you know, it's two things. It's spiritual and intellectual take. I don't want to limit. I don't want anybody to come to tell me, you know what, this work done by a human being cannot be questioned. No, what is not questioned is the Prophet ﷺ. But a human being, I want to question, I want to check, and I want the people who are equipped to do so, but not to tell me you can't, because that's the problem. So there is something here which is, for me, a question of principle. But on the other side, I don't want what I said right now, to be used by people to say, oh, a hadith has no relevance and we have to go beyond. Oh, no, I'm not saying this. I'm not saying this. I'm very serious about the rules, and in everything that I'm doing, even if calling to a radical reform, calling to an intellectual revolution in the way we deal, I'm very myself, and I want you to get me right, I'm very strict with the rules. I'm very strict with the conditions. But I don't want anybody to tell me you can't go that way because this was said. Is the bab, you know, the doors of ijtihad were never closed. They will never be closed. And anyone who is trying to say the doors of intellectual inquiry about what was done by human beings is closed, never. That's not us. That's not my tradition. I wouldn't accept this, and I think that it came from our history, by people who are it's an in-between. So this is what could be understood as maybe new, which is a clear take on where we have to push, even though many scholars before said it, but I want this to be open in our Islamic studies. I think that I went through all of them, no? Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. About identity, where you were. Look, if you listen carefully to what I tried to say this evening, behind it, there is a clear question of identities, the way we are defining ourselves. But I wouldn't put it that way. I think identity, the way it's put now in the West and the way we are experiencing a crisis of identity, it's a distortion of the real question. The real question is not about our identity. The real question is about very much understanding the substance of the message and the goals of the message, the objectives and the substance. I would say it's three things that we have to consider, not defining me as a Muslim. It could come out of your understanding of the principles, the source, the means that you have, and the goals that you are achieving. And I think that this is where starts the question. And it's through this that you can define your own identity. But to start with your identity, it's problematic. It's tricky, the question of identity. Are you defining your identity out of yourself or against the others? And in fact, you cannot define your identity without dealing with others. So at the end, there is this relationship. So I would say I would prefer to come in Islamic studies to the discussion as to the message itself. And this is what I did this evening. Say, okay, our object is a message. And the message, by definition, is setting goals to achieve and a mission. And let it be the last words for this evening. If you deal with science and you understand that as human beings you have a mission in reforming the self and reforming the world, it means a specific take on science and knowledge. And also in liberating yourself from something which is a shirk al-khafi, which is knowledge, Islamic studies. It's not to get a degree. It's not to be a doctor. It's not to be a sheikh. It's not to be a alim. It's not to be a allama. It's to serve. It's to serve. It's to use the knowledge to serve. And this is essential. So I would say to all the students who are in Islamic studies, mind you, a shirk is in the degree. Get me right. Thank you.